So a crazy transfer window is over for Liverpool, and I have to say, from a reporter's perspective, I'm quite glad it's come to an end, and I'm pretty sure that Richard Hughes will feel similarly, because he's absolutely earned a holiday, hasn't he, with the work that he's got through over the last few months. But now that the window is shut, I wanted to kind of take a look back at it and really kind of assess what Liverpool have done, and kind of try and judge really whether this has been as good a window as it maybe should have been for all the money that Liverpool has spent. So what I'm going to do is kind of look back at what the aims for the window were, and for me really, I think having won the league as Liverpool did, which was a bit of a canter, but of course falling short in the Champions League, and I say falling short, going out to the winners is no disgrace in that, but of course Liverpool always want to go into that competition and do as well as possible. But the aim obviously for me really was not necessarily to flesh out the squad or to necessarily add depth, because I think Liverpool had plenty of that. It was just to try and get the quality levels up, so that of course they could go a little bit further in the Champions League this time around. They could maybe defend the crown despite other clubs spending in the Premier League. So for me though, that was the aim really, is to just bring the quality level up rather than anything else. So I want to go through position by position, judge whether Liverpool were able to do that. And of course I'm going to start at the back and in defence, and start really with the out, because, and this is a theme really for many of the positions for Liverpool, is that a lot of this business that was needed to be done this summer was because they sanctioned so many departures. And so similar really at the back, of course, and I'm going to focus on departures who picked up fairly significant first team minutes, so that we're not going through maybe the youngsters who left on loan or whatever. So in terms of the outs, you've got Quaveen Kelleher, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Jarell Quansah and Kostas Tsimikas, which of course immediately, when you know that you're sanctioning those exits, it means that you need a backup goalkeeper, you need a right back, you need a centre half, and you definitely need a left back. And starting with the goalkeeper, of course, Georgi Marmadashvili, £29 million. Of course, you could probably not necessarily include him in this summer's business. He was bought last summer, but of course he has come in this time around, and now is finally a Liverpool first team player. And we haven't seen much of him so far. I think that's what you would expect. He's not going to start ahead of Alisson in the Premier League or the Champions League unless Alisson is injured, is he? But we did get some kind of glimpses of him in pre-season, and I think what we did see was quite encouraging, enough to say that, you know, at least he's not a disastrous signing so far, that's for sure. I think, you know, some really smart stops in there. He didn't look too bad with the ball at his feet, but that's an area maybe he'll have to work on going forward, because that's not a strength he's shown at Valencia. But of course he didn't really get the chance to do that. They weren't a side that necessarily wanted to play from the back, so we'll learn a bit more about that as he goes on. And I'm pretty sure that when that first League Cup game comes around, he's going to be between the sticks, so that's going to be the start of the learning process about him. Although, as I say, I think he was quite impressive in pre-season, and he's shown incredible potential at Valencia as well. Incredible shot-stopping statistics, and performing way above expected goals on target. So the talent is certainly there. It's just a case of kind of bedding him in, getting him used to the Premier League and life at Liverpool, and then, as I say, learning as we go, as he gets the chances to make more appearances really. And I think it's a smart signing as well, on the basis that you get the chance now to have him alongside Alisson, bed him in, and the plan of course will eventually be for him to be the man who succeeds Alisson. So a decent start from what we've seen in pre-season, but as I say, we'll learn a little bit more about him as he goes forward. But I think on paper he does look a smart signing, and I think we could say similar about Jeremy Frimpong, 35 million from Bayer Leverkusen, and I think obviously he scored already in the Community Shield. I think people seem to like his character a lot. He seems like good fun, doesn't he? And I think the players, by all accounts, have really taken to him. He's a really kind of popular member of the dressing room already, which, you know, is not easy to bed in at a club like Liverpool that's so big, and yet he seems to have really taken to it like a duck to water. And we knew about his pace, which we've already seen plenty of evidence of. But what I think I've most liked about him so far is he's looked a determined defender, and you know, Trent Alexander-Arnold, fairly or unfairly, got a lot of stick for that aspect of his game, didn't he? But I think the difference I'm noticing so far is that I think Frimpong is definitely more committed to that aspect of the game. Whether he'll prove to be better at it, we'll have to see. Still very early days for him, but I think he's definitely more determined in his defending. I think we're going to have to get used to a change in style, and this is not just supporters watching on or journalists. It's also, I think, the coaching staff and his teammates, really, in terms of a change in how he plays that right back role compared to Trent Alexander-Arnold. He's not going to be behind the ball as much. He's going to be up and down that side and really utilising that pace, but trying to get into the box as well, whereas that wasn't really what Trent looked to do, certainly in his latter years. But I think, as I say, I think he looks a smart acquisition already. I think, he's looked dangerous going forward. There's been some decent link up down that right hand side at times. Just a shame about the injury, but his injury record is, when you look back at it, pretty strong as well. So this is a rare one, and hopefully doesn't become a recurring theme for him. May just be a case of kind of getting used to the intensity of the Premier League. But as I say, an encouraging start for Frimpong. Got for a bit of a cut down price, really, you'd have to say, as well, at 35 million. So a lot of potential there, and looking forward to seeing more of him when he gets fit the other side of the international break. Now, of course, there was a change on the other fullback side as well, and I'm talking about the addition of Milos Kerkez for 45 million. I have to say, really, for me, and I thought this when he signed, looking at his numbers and the development you'd seen in him, particularly over the last kind of final 6 months at Bournemouth as well, is that for me, I think we're already looking at a player here who has the chance in the next 18 months or so to establish himself as the best left back in the Premier League. Now, that may seem risky to say because we've seen a little bit of it. He had maybe a shaky start at Liverpool in his first couple of competitive games, but for me, I think we're already seeing him kind of turn a corner, and I mean, turning a corner from maybe one or two so-so games, but I think we're already seeing the development in him at Liverpool here. And I mean, I look at the Newcastle performance. For me, that was vastly underrated, really, in terms of how he dealt with Anthony Elanga. I thought he did a really good job down that side. There was one mistake in that game, which of course was a big one, allowing Bruno to get over him to score that header, but I thought his overall performance was actually pretty good. And Elanga is so pacey, so dangerous, and you look, Newcastle didn't create too much from open play. It was a lot of kind of long balls, and I thought Kerkez marshalled Elanga down that side really well. And then he went into the Arsenal game after that, and I think he just built on his performance in that and just kept all of the good things going. I thought Madueke was their most dangerous player, and yet Kerkez kind of locked him down for most of the game, really, dealt with him really well. And you look at his statistics so far from the Premier League season, he's won 83.3% of his tackles, 64.5% of his duels. That puts him 71st and 83rd percentile in terms of those stats in the Premier League so far amongst defenders. And I think that just shows he's just someone who wins his battles consistently. There is, of course, more to come from him, in terms of what he can contribute going forward, but I just don't doubt that he's going to bring that and his athleticism, and when the team settles down a bit, you'll get him in down that left-hand side a little bit more. And of course, the bonus of signing him as well is that you've now kind of moved Andy Robertson from a starting role to a backup, but Andy Robertson for me is a very, very capable backup, loads of experience. He's now the vice captain as well, so I think Liverpool have got stronger at left back with the addition of Milos Kerkez. They've now got two very, very good left backs there, which of course makes the squad as a whole stronger. So again, another smart one for me. And of course, there is one more defensive signing as well to discuss, which is Giovanni Leone, brought in from Parma for 26 million. And again, with Leone, very early to get a read on whether this is a good signing or not. What you can say, very highly rated. He looks like he's built physically for the Premier League, that's for sure. One thing you could say is, at the moment, because we haven't seen anything, you could maybe say, it's a bit of a downgrade on Quansah. He hasn't got the Premier League experience. Quansah was very important for Liverpool over his last couple of seasons, but I mean, let's see what happens. I'm very much looking forward to seeing Leone. I think we will see him in that first League Cup game. As I say, Liverpool were adamant when he signed. They had no intention whatsoever of loaning him out, so they think that he's ready. And they also, I understand, they think he's got an incredibly high ceiling, this player. He's that, he was a long-term aim to get in a young centre-half who they felt had a high ceiling, high potential, and they believe Leone is that man. And, judging by Liverpool's usual transfer record, you wouldn't be surprised if they're absolutely right about this kid. So very, very much looking forward to seeing him. But of course, the jury will be out until we do actually see him on the pitch. But hopefully that will come soon. And a quick note, of course, while we're talking about the defensive aspect of the pitch, of course, Liverpool did lose Vítězslav Jaroš. He went out on loan, but they did add Freddie Woodman in that third goalkeeper role, who I thought looked okay in pre-season. Again, we didn't see much, but what we saw, he looked very comfortable with the ball at his feet. And Armin Peichi as well, who not necessarily considered a first-team ready goalkeeper at the moment, but was nominated for the Golden Boy. Very high potential signing as well. So again, Liverpool not missing a trick there, still looking quite strong in that aspect. Even the third goalkeeper role, they've really looked after and looking pretty strong there. Of course, just to wrap up on the defensive additions and outgoings, of course, you can't not mention that Liverpool didn't manage to sign Mark Guéhi on deadline day, and there's just no getting away from the fact that that is a blow. But for me, one thing I have to say is, of course, the flip side of that is Joe Gomez wasn't allowed to leave for that reason. So Liverpool still have 4 centre-halves, which was always their aim, was to have 4. I've talked a lot of times, really, about the idea that having 5, it's not really feasible for a manager to do that. There's not enough minutes for everybody. Someone is going to be really unhappy. So that wasn't sustainable. So for now, I don't feel like they're massively weaker there. They still have those 4 centre-halves. You do have to maybe cross your fingers about Joe Gomez and his fitness, but hopefully he gets a bit more fortune than he has last season. And Canate, again, it kind of went under the radar completely that his injury record under this new manager who does things in a completely different way to Jurgen Klopp was vastly improved. So, outside of being fallen on by Endrick of Real Madrid, he didn't really have an injury at all last season. So I don't think it's outrageous to think that you can get to January with Canate playing a significant chunk of minutes, and then we see a bit of Leone in the Cups, a bit of Joe Gomez as well. It's certainly enough. It's not a million miles away from what Liverpool had last season when they walked the league. So and I would say on Canate as well, he's had a kind of rough start to the season, but I thought he was absolutely back to his best against Arsenal. And this idea, and I've seen this repeated in very different media outlets, maybe fans online, and I think some Liverpool fans even seem to reflect this, is that not signing Guéhi is kind of kibosh Liverpool's title chances. But I didn't think they absolutely had to sign Guéhi as a starter. I think yes, he would start an awful lot of games and he'd be part of a rotation to help out. But for me, Canate is a top-class defender. Let's not forget that. Let's not forget his performances last season as well. So it wasn't that Liverpool desperately needed to get him out the team or they had no chance. He is a very, very, very good defender, an elite-level defender. And, it's more really with Guéhi is kind of getting ahead of the Canate contract issue potentially, and also replacing Joe Gomez if he were to leave. But that hasn't happened. So I've not got massive concerns here about Liverpool being hugely short at centre-half until January, when maybe that Guéhi situation could resolve itself. So I don't really share over-the-top concerns, which is what I believe they are about that position. But we'll, of course, we will kind of see how Liverpool get on in that regard. Maybe I'll be completely wrong, but I still feel that they're very strong in that back half of the pitch after this summer's business. Now I'm going to move into midfield now and quickly go through the outs there, the significant outs really, which is of course Tyler Morton and Harvey Elliott. I say they are significant outs, but of course it is worth mentioning 261 minutes and 822 minutes in all competitions respectively. They also lost James McConnell on loan, but again, he did not play very much at all. And if you need a break glass option because injuries are hitting, it's a League Cup game, you need to just get someone in there. Then they did retain Stefan Bajcetic as well, so they're not short of options there. So they didn't really have a massive need in midfield. They got very, very strong in that area. And yet they made a big addition, arguably one of the most high-profile signings of the window in Florian Wirtz for 116 million from Bayer Leverkusen. And that has immediately lifted the midfield in terms of the talent level, that's for sure. He's come with big expectations on him. And to be fair, there's no getting away from the fact that maybe the start of his Liverpool career has been a little quiet. Don't think there's anything massively encouraging there in the underlying numbers I can give you yet that will show you or make you think that he's definitely going to be a success at Liverpool. But also, look what he did in the Bundesliga, look what he's done for Germany, and factor in that Bournemouth, Newcastle, Arsenal, it's an unbelievably tough start against physical midfields who are hugely intense, and you're playing in the number 10 position, the hardest position on the pitch to find space to operate in the most intense league in the world when you are used to the Bundesliga. It's difficult. It's a really, really difficult hand that he's been dealt there. But I just don't for a second doubt that this guy is going to be a massive success for Liverpool. You look at all his previous underlying numbers, you just watch him in the flesh. I've watched him in these games, and yes, they've not been sparkling, but they haven't been terrible either. You can see the talent there. It's so clear. And I think I'll just look at the Community Shield as well. He gets an assist. He's most chances created with 4 up against a really difficult side to face in Crystal Palace. And he ran 11 kilometres in that Bournemouth game as well. That's worth mentioning. He's capable of matching this Premier League intensity, even if he's not absolutely showing his best football yet. But the key thing to remember here as well, and a key point to make, I think, is watch his second half against Arsenal. When Liverpool started to get him the ball more in positions where he can make a difference, I thought he was absolutely fantastic in that game and really encouraged by what I saw. So I have just no concerns whatsoever, and I think he's going to be an unbelievable signing for Liverpool. And I think they didn't necessarily need that in midfield. It wasn't an area where they were desperate, but it very much fits the bill of kind of upping the quality level in there, doesn't it, in terms of adding a player like this to your number 10 position. So very much looking forward to seeing how that works out, and I think it's no doubt for me that the midfield is stronger than it was last season. And now that just leaves, of course, the attack, and again, quickly to go through the outs, and Luis Diaz, Darwin Núñez, Ben Doak, and of course, you have to mention, by the way, the tragic loss of Diogo Jota here. I think, you know, people behind the scenes at Liverpool will have this conversation now, where they, you know, will point out that you are allowed to mention this. They loved him. He's the loss of a much loved colleague, but also the loss of a fantastic footballer who was really important to Liverpool. And you know, Liverpool have had to factor that into the summer business this time around, really. So it is worth thinking about, really, in terms of what they had last season, in terms of the depth and the quality there, and how they've had to recover from losing him, as well as moving players on in transfers. Now, the response to that has been to spend an awful lot of money in this area of the pitch, and of course, Hugo Ekitike for 79 million from Eintracht Frankfurt. I don't really have to say much about him so far. I mean, he just looks an unbelievably smart signing, doesn't he? 3 goals in his 4 competitive appearances. I love how strong he looks and his ability to compete in this league, which is really encouraging. Great touch, intelligent, works his socks off. He is adapting to Liverpool's pressing style, but he's getting there. Hugely encouraged by what he's seen so far. And of course, Liverpool have also signed another centre forward yesterday on deadline day, which is of course Alexander Isak for 125 million. And again, do we really need to debate if a player with 54 goals and 10 assists in 86 Premier League appearances is worth that sort of money? I know there are injury concerns that people bring up, but I would urge you, go and watch my video analysing Alexander Isak on this channel. It's just, there are just no concerns about this player whatsoever, in my opinion. You know, if he starts to get unlucky with the injuries and has more problems, maybe. But even that injury concern, I think personally, is overblown. And this is just a player who, in my opinion, in a team that will create more chances, get in the box more, he could become the best centre forward in the world in the next 3 years. He could genuinely cement that status, I believe. So very much looking forward to seeing more of him. However, of course, that is the addition of 2 senior forwards for Liverpool, and that does beg the question: if you don't have Diaz, you don't have Jota, you don't have Núñez, and you only signed 2 forwards, is that enough with just 2 signed? Now, it's an interesting debate, and I think it's one that fans were kind of concerned about, but I maybe want to give you a kind of different perspective on this now. So consider that last season, a season where Liverpool, you know, I don't think depth was the reason they got knocked out of the Champions League. They just came out against a better side in PSG. I don't think depth didn't hurt them in the Premier League, that's for sure, did it? Where they absolutely won it at a canter, and again against Newcastle at Wembley, could have won the Carabao Cup, but came up against a more intense side on a day that meant so much to them and played fantastically and deserved to win. So when you bear all that in mind, really, you look at Diaz last season, 3,323 minutes. Núñez, 2,058. Jota, 1,831. Now that is, in total, 7,212 minutes across 3 players who are playing in Liverpool's attack in all competitions, going deep in all competitions. Now, divide that by 2. Is it feasible for that workload to be taken up by just 2 players? You divide 7,212 by 2, you get 3,606 minutes. And I can tell you now, Gravenberch, Van Dijk, Salah, they all played more. They're expensive key players. They all played more than that last season. McAllister played 3,000 558, Szoboszlai 3,421, so not a million miles off from those two either. So it is in theory feasible for two players to come in and take up all those minutes themselves, and for Liverpool not to miss a beat. I think the one area of concern you would say really is that just specifically on that left-hand side of attack, that is maybe where things have changed. Of course, it was Diaz and Gakpo fighting for that position, so one of them would start, the other could come off the bench, and that has changed now. It's Rio Ngamoura, and that does feel like a step down, doesn't it? You've got incredible quality in that centre-forward role if Ekitike and Isak are to compete for that. On the right-hand side, Frimpong can do bits there, absolutely. Szoboszlai can to help out Salah, but you expect Salah to do another 3,700 odd minute season, or 4,000 I think it was in the end. So you expect him to take up most of those anyway. But that left-hand side, you're not going to have Diaz on the bench if you start Gakpo. You're not going to have a Gakpo on the bench if you start your alternative, which of course is Rio Ngamoura. And I think that is a fair concern, I think, for people. That's one area of the squad that you could say is maybe slightly weaker in depth than it was last season. But I think the question you have to ask, and Liverpool asked themselves this question going into this season with everything they'd seen in training and close up to the players, can they afford really to block Rio Ngamoura, to not give him the minutes he deserves? He's already made his Premier League debut this season. He will take up an awful lot of cup minutes. He will, I'm sure he will play in the Champions League as well. And I just think when you get a talent of this size, you cannot afford to block them off. You can't go and get a Rodrigo and say, well, okay, Rio, you might play the odd League Cup game. That should be enough for you, because you just need to let him fly. And you have to, maybe it's just slightly ahead of schedule, but you can't block him off. And as I say, signing a Rodrigo or a Morgan Rogers would have done that. It would have just prevented Rio Ngamoura from getting any significant minutes, because, say Gakpo goes on a run of starting the main games in the Champions League or the Premier League, then, the other guy that you've got, who's maybe it's Morgan Rogers, maybe it's Rodrigo, they've got to start the cup games. They've got to kind of start the other games. They've got to be the ones who come off the bench, and all of a sudden Rio is not getting many minutes at all. So I kind of see Liverpool's thinking on this, and I think one thing that's massively helpful here is, yes, the numbers have maybe gone slightly down, but Liverpool have kept Chiesa around, which is wasn't the plan coming into this window. I think very early in the window, if a decent bid would have come in, he would have been allowed to go. But that is keeping a player who can play left, he can play on the right, he can play centrally as well. And so that gives you some depth on those sides. If you're a little bit worried about overuse of Ngamoura in certain situations, you got Wirtz now, who's coming in as another player who you probably aim to get him around the 4,000 minute mark in all competitions. He can also play on that left-hand side and cover you off a little bit there. So for me, it's a little bit of a gamble in terms of that. It might see Ngamoura put into situations where you ideally wouldn't see him put. But I just think Liverpool, the whole aim for the window was to go quality and bring the quality up. And I think when you look at the front line last season, there were question marks over quite a few of those players that have moved on. And now what they've got, I think there are fewer question marks. I think the quality level, you just cannot deny, has gone up, even if the quantity has come down. Of course, the proof will be in the pudding in terms of whether that works. But I think on paper, Liverpool have achieved their aim there in terms of bringing that quality level up in the front line. So I guess really that leaves me to kind of sum up the window as a whole. I mean, £415 million spent, £187 million received, a £228 million net spend, which is quite impressive when you consider how much Liverpool have done, and it's still actually less than Arsenal's £246 million net spend. So huge pressure on them to win the title, isn't there, in this coming season? And I'd say, like I say, some questions over that depth up top, but we will see. Centre-back issue maybe in an injury crisis, but as I say, I think the aim for Liverpool was to make the squad overall stronger than it was last season. And on paper, I truly believe, going through those signings and what they've got now, I think they have achieved that. Now, in theory, looking at the amount of talent they've signed there and Liverpool's record in the transfer market, this could be one of the best windows in the club's history, given the talent added, maybe even the best window in the club's history. But I prefer to wait to say that, because all sorts of things can go wrong, all sorts of twists and turns and injuries and all sorts of issues. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. But what I will say is, while we are here on paper, it looks a fantastic window for Liverpool in my opinion, but we will see when the real football gets back underway and the games keep coming thick and fast, and whether Liverpool can achieve their aims of winning the Premier League and the Champions League and maybe another pot on top of that this season. So going to wrap it up there. A big long dissection of Liverpool's summer transfer business. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm of course interested to hear your thoughts on Liverpool's summer window in the comments as well, and if you can drop me a like and a subscribe, that would be massively appreciated also, and I'll see you guys very soon.